Hello. Oh. 2 p.m. Where is everybody? Waiting for you all. Nobody here. There's one. Julie. So today's discussion, well, I guess I'll start with who am I? Who am I? Jax West, just a supporter. Smile for John. Crazy smile. Hello. So there's John and Christina and Julie and Janine and Jennifer and Martine in Australia. So, all right, we got 12 people on here so far. And Bad Cops here. Christy Lynn is here to remove you if you are don't behave. So yesterday I visited with Stephen. There were no pictures this time. So yes, I know the fans are going to say that I'm lying about my visit since I don't have a picture to prove it. So one thing I'll start off by saying is it was sad because it was Father's Day. And so the room fills up with all these families, children all over. And there was even at one point this one little boy. I mean, he had to have been 2. And he came up and he was behind my chair, or behind the chair that's next to me, because we're sitting at a table. There's one chair on the one side for the inmate and then 2 chairs on the other side for the visitors. So the boy was behind the second chair that I wasn't sitting in. And oops, sorry, let me turn that off to try and get some sound off. And so, smiling and looking at this little boy that's hiding back there. And then it just ended up bumming Stephen out that, he never got to raise his kids, and that it was Father's Day and he doesn't hear from his kids, and that, his dad didn't come and visit him. His parents need somebody to help them get there. So, because of their physical limitations and such. And so, he got a little bummed out for a minute on it was Father's Day and he didn't have family, visiting him. So that was sad. Scrolling through your comments. So we discussed the phone calls, and I discussed that with them the other day or the day before, but I asked him some questions, and some were questions that Carol Ann Fitzgerald had messaged to Stephen Avery Project to ask Stephen. So one question of Carol Ann's was, was Stephen supposed to be picking up Jody that day and taking her to one of her alcohol classes or whatever those things were? And Stephen says he doesn't recall. He said he knows he took her to classes all the time and that they were on weekdays, not weekends. So that being a Monday, that could have been, but at this point he says he doesn't remember if he was supposed to pick her up that day or not. So he says he and Jody talked every day, almost every day, many times a day. There was no set schedule for that, just that they talked all the time. And he said that was something they also argued over, is with how much she would call. And he's like, I can't afford this, all these calls. And then it's just fighting. So, and then she was in jail, not prison. That's something, people always forget, that there's a difference between jail and prison. And she was in jail, and jail calls could only go to landlines. So Stephen was 100% talking to her on a landline. He had a cordless phone. And so I asked him if his phone was able to reach the burn pit. Did he have reception to go to the burn pit? And he says, I don't know. I never tried. And I said, well, there's an answer right there. And he said, well, he couldn't get to his driveway. So that would, and the burn pit is behind his garage. So there's your answer there for anybody who will say that he was on his phone out by the burn pit while talking to Jody, stoking to this to the bones. I asked him about Bear, his German Shepherd, that the cops were so scared of they couldn't take pictures of evidence. I asked if Bear liked Bobby, and he said no. Just because when is all that stuff planted, and Bear is chained up there, how could people get them there? If they're, depending on how this dog is. So he said that the Bear definitely didn't like anybody in uniform, and didn't like Bobby because Bobby was mean to Bear. So I thought that was interesting. Then he said that he knows that Scott was with Bobby that day at Barb's trailer, and that that Scott's truck was parked directly behind Bobby. So Bobby's not going anywhere unless Scott goes too, because Scott was parked directly behind Bobby. So I'm scrolling through your comments right now. People saying hello. Carol Ann is late. No problem, Carol Ann. Christy says, if Bobby knew that ahead of time, he could have brought something like a steak to calm Bear. Right. What else was there? Sorry, I should have taken, I should have fresh from the prison taken bullet points so I can remember everything. So sorry of my pauses in here as I try to think and remember of things that were discussed that I can share, because there are some things that I and not trying to sound like a douchebag, but there are things that he says that I won't say. Well, I'll also combine in here some of the stuff that I talked to him on the phone about, since it goes back to the calls too, just so it's all in one spot. But let me scroll. Hi. Julie says, during one call, he was telling Brendan to put it over there or something like that. Jody asked who he was talking to. He said Brendan. Stephen must have been on his porch overseeing Brendan clearing the garage so the Suzuki could get pushed in there. thinking it was the 1st of November, maybe. I did mention to him on one of the calls how it was that something about how Barb wanted Brendan to do the dishes, and that Steven got him over by him instead, and that they had then gone over there and saw that Barb had done the dishes. Yeah, so Sand asks, how does he seem? Is he doing okay? Yeah, he's doing the same as always. I did talk to him about the letter that Kathleen had posted that Steven wrote, and I told him how it made people think that he was like giving up. He's not giving up. That was more of a to get supporters to rally behind him. Was the purpose of that letter, but Steven's never going to give up. He was, as I said at the beginning of this video, there was a little moment of being bummed out because it was Father's Day and he doesn't have any opportunity to talk to or see his family. They don't come see him, and he said he had called several people and they didn't answer his call. So he did talk to his mom that morning. So, but other people he had called didn't answer his call. So, but overall, he's doing all right. And we talked for quite a bit of time on where he's planning on living when he is out, and talking about his plans for that he's he gets really kind of excited talking about that opportunity and how he is going to live, because he wants to be like off the grid, and does all this research on doing his electric and all this. And so of course I won't say where he plans on living, but it's good for him. It's not Wisconsin. So getting him out of Wisconsin. But he does have he's got a whole lot of plans. So that's good. Gives them, something to dream about. Julie says dogs' instincts are usually pretty accurate. Yeah. Christina says, has Steven ever said that he and Jody had a bad breakup? Just wondering why she switched her story so drastically. We didn't talk about the breakup. But remember, in Making a Murderer, it was that they were keeping Steven and Jody apart. So it became harder because, Jody being a constant DUI offender, for them to have any kind of a relationship. So, and their relationship, as you can tell in those calls, was pretty contentious, but though those calls show me again how Steven is not the monster that people make him out to be. Where he's telling Jody she should work, and that he works now. He doesn't have a job in the prison, but a lot of the stuff that happens at the salvage yard is because Steven is the one directing things. And Steven is the one that, when he was free for those 2 years, that he got that salvage yard on track. He's really passionate about that yard. And he talked about it yesterday, as he calls his dad, old man, my old man, worked hard on that business, and Stephen wanted to continue that legacy. So Jodi just was lazy, and with her being a drunk and she's not able to drive anywhere, Stephen said that would be constant arguing of Stephen would go somewhere and then she'd like, how come you didn't come pick me up? I want to go too. And he's just trying to get stuff done. So oh, Kimberly, and I just said that. Does he have a job of any kind in prison to keep him busy? He had worked in the kitchen for a while and for a couple years. And so he doesn't have a job currently. He wants to spend more time like returning letters, but he still doesn't. You know, he's just not a good letter writer. And he says he doesn't get all that many letters. It comes and goes. You know, I said, do you still get a lot? And he said, no. Now the mail system there gets screwy at times. So, and you know, it has to go through, you know, and get approved before you can even get it. So, you know, somebody's reading your mail and looking at it. And I said, do you think maybe they're keeping stuff from you? And he said, no, he doesn't think that. But, so he's just not getting the letters you would think. So I will again, you know, send him a letter, chat with him, get his mind off of things. You know, don't write him a letter because you want a letter back and because you want his signature. So, you know, write him because you just want to take him away from what he's dealing with for a couple of minutes. Julie says, sore subject, but at the rally, Kratz film crew for convicting a murderer were there interviewing people, and the supporters were actually talking to those pieces of shit. I'm a bit disturbed about that. Well, I will again say, and I know people don't like when I say this from the other side, they're not supporters. Those are fans. Period. Because fans are the ones that just want to be a part of their favorite TV show and get their picture taken with the characters surrounding in their show. Supporters are going to follow the evidence and goes where the evidence takes them, which is to Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadych. The people who run that rally and attend that rally are all people who cave to and protect the people who actually committed this alleged crime. So by there being no talk allowed about Bobby or Scott, you're keeping Brendan and Stephen in prison. How is that a supporter? That's not. That's a fan. So you're going by what the family members who are hiding Bobby and Scott, you know, you're helping them, not Brendan and Stephen. Therefore, you are a fan, not a supporter. Talking to convicting a murderer. Now, there is that one clip that got posted in here in Gossip when the guy was talking with Kratz, and I mean, that guy got Kratz pretty good. So, I would have to see what it is that they were actually talking about. But, to me, the rally is an embarrassment. The people that go to the rally are an embarrassment to the cause. And then what's going to happen with whatever video that convicting a murderer got is going to show what an embarrassment those fans are. Because you have making a murderer being this huge phenomenon, right? Again, fans, people who are all excited about the TV show. Stephen Avery Project. Let me scroll here. Where is it? On Stephen Avery Project, which I know Carla just loves when I have to talk about how many people Stephen Avery Project has. We currently have on Stephen Avery Project 201,084 followers. And then you have 50 people at that rally. And how many of those are family members? There. So that's a horrible number to be there. Yes, and I know there was another rally in Philly because the people who organized Wisconsin and the people who organized Philly don't like each other. So they had to have competing rallies, but then they would say they were connected, but they really weren't. And there was, 15 people there? That's embarrassing. And then you have, yes, as the Christina saying, wonder if Barb got any heat at the rally. There's Barb there. And I know the person put out the phone calls because they wanted somebody to put heat on Barb, but that's not going to happen because, again, those are fans, not supporters. So the fans aren't going to say boo to Barb because they're in her group and in Carla's group where you're not allowed to talk about that Bobby and Scott are guilty. So, and Carla's watching this video. Hi, Carla. This is for you, Carla. And then Sandra Greenman will be watching this video. Hi, Sandra. This is for you too, Sandra. And they want to play these videos for Stephen to go, see, these are the things she says about family. I say these things to Stephen on the phone on the visits, so he knows that I think the rally is stupid. I told him the rally is stupid. He's for the rallies. Stephen approved of the rallies, but then there were things about the rallies that he didn't like, and I won't go into that. But Stephen is just all for getting, supporters, but again, there's the difference, supporters and fans. So, the whole thing to me is just a total train wreck. Whatever. All right, let me scroll on your comments before I keep ranting there. Kimberly says, is Jodi currently in jail or prison, or did she ever get sober? I know there was an arrest not that long ago, but I don't know what her status is. People replying to each other. Sand says, Jodi kept talking about things she wanted him to buy for her. Yeah, I know. And Stephen just laughed about it because I said it's in there how she wanted this $20 jewelry thing or whatever it was. Yeah, she just want. Carol Ann says, oh, I have one here I should send today. Good, thanks, Carol. Hi, Tara. Leah says, is it okay to send him Bible verses and that type of encouragement? I wouldn't ever want to send him something that would bother him or offend him by what I send him. Now, while Stephen's not religious, he wouldn't be bothered by that. Go ahead, Leah, and send him your Bible verses and encouragement, San says, I write him when I can, maybe once a month. That's great, San. Kimberly says, I wonder who Brendan thinks did it. I don't know. I haven't talked to him, in years. And when I did talk to him, I never talked to him about things like that because I didn't want him to talk about the case at all, so we talked about video games and hamburgers and, stuff like that. So, yeah, I have no idea what Brendan thinks. Hi, Miley. I'm so tan, am I? It might just be this lighting. Julie says, never was a rally until Making a Murderer came out. Yeah, never was a visit either, other than Stephen's parents. Miley says 49. Carol Ann says, I just don't see how rallies help. They'd be better off protesting outside of Judge Flowers' office. Well, in the past, when I have talked to lawyers about doing something like that, they don't want the court messed with in any way. So they requested not doing any kind of protest or letter writing campaign or anything like that, to just leave that all alone. So, but, and I agree with you on rallies. I am an activist. I have organized many a rally, many a march in the last couple of years. And what do they really accomplish? They don't. So, yeah. Julia says, what's the issue with Jody hating Stephen's sister? All of them hate each other at one point or another. And Jody was a drunk and she's bitchy. And I'm sure Jody and Barb got into it a couple times. And Jody's just really self-absorbed, you know. So Carol Ann says, I don't understand the problem with Sandy. Sandy hates me. That all came about when she hooked up with other people to start their own Facebook group. Prior to that, she was just fine. And but then it becomes this competition over who Stephen likes best and which Facebook page represents Stephen. You know, so that's why they had to say when they made their one, we're the ones that represent Stephen, not Stephen Avery Project that started right when Making a Murderer came out. And it's just stupid. It's a stupid competition thing. And so Stephen told me that Sandy, who doesn't visit him anymore, he said she is on the list, but she doesn't come visit. You know, so, yep, she'll always be there for Stephen. Yeah, okay. That she has complained to Stephen. I don't know why you would put Jax on your list. And it's, nobody's going to tell Stephen who he can or can't. Now, yes, he does get manipulated when Tracy Strunzi got him all pissed off at me. We talked about that again yesterday, where I laugh at I'm constantly accused of stealing money and taking money from Stephen. And it's like, show me how. I'm like, Stephen, seriously, go look at Stephen Avery Project. How am I getting money from this? You know, all the posts I make is, if you want to give money to Stephen, put it in his commissary or to Kathleen. How am I getting money from that? I said, I'm not the one putting up a video using Dolores to make a video that has ads in it. What are ads? A way to get money. So you're using Dolores to lure people in and then make money off that video. That wasn't, hey, look at Dolores. Yay, Dolores. That's, we know people care about Dolores, and now we're going to get money off of you because we have a video for you to watch. I told him the way they use Dolores, to me, is sickening. We discussed the post that Brittany, Earl's daughter, had made, and putting how that Dolores had puke in her hair and then was trying to sell her cleaning products. Stephen is really pissed off about that. But funny, people in the family told him it was Kayla that did it. And I said, no, that wasn't Kayla. And I said, as a matter of fact, it was posted, the post was posted in the gossip group. And Kayla commented on it and said, take this down. I don't like that my sister did this, and I don't like this being up about my grandma. And so then I removed that post. I was iffy to post it to begin with because I really don't like Dolores being shown in that light. But I did not put it in Stephen Avery Project. I put it in Gossip because, again, MAM Gossip is about all the stupid bullshit that surrounds the case, not just the case. But then when Kayla asked to take it down, it's like, that's all I needed then. Yep, take it down. But the family that constantly has an axe to grind with Kayla told Stephen Kayla is the one that did it. And I told him, no, it wasn't. You know, he can do with that what he wishes. But I said, that was not Kayla, it was Brittany. And he also didn't know about the trying to sell cleaning products thing in the post. He only knew about the post being made about Dolores having puke in her hair. So, yeah. Let me scroll. Julie says, no local media coverage at the rally Saturday. No county or state officials around. They don't know how to do that. You know, the first rally, I organized it. Now they're on their own. Kimberly, I sure wish the state would get their act together and reply to KZ, right? Yeah, that's another thing we talked about with Stephen yesterday, and how much it sucks that you just have to wait around. So aggravating. Julia says he was on the phone when they say he did it, and the paperwork that is on Reddit, the paperwork didn't add up. Yeah, I was telling Stephen yesterday how so many things just don't add up. The only thing that is a consistent is what Stephen says. And again, it's because Stephen tells the truth, and so it's easy to remember the truth. It's hard to remember a lie. So, you know, going from when Prison Break is on, and he says he knows Prison Break was on from 7 to 9 that night. It was on for 2 hours, but it doesn't matter that it was on for 2 hours because he's on the call saying that Barb's not leaving until 9:20. So 1 hour or 2 hours, Prison Break ends at 9, and she's leaving at 9:20, and both her and Scott say they were watching Prison Break. But then I was saying to him too, how does this timeline even work? That Barb gets home from work at 5 o'clock, right? What time is Scott picking her up to go to the hospital? Because is he there right at 5 and she goes directly from 5? Or is it, I just got off of work, I need a few minutes, you know, so like at 5:30 they leave. Then it's like a 35-minute drive from Barb's to the hospital in Green Bay. So you're not getting there till 6, right? 6-ish. So then if you're getting back in time to watch Prison Break, does that mean you're visiting for like 20 minutes and then driving the 35 minutes back? Because then Scott drops Barb off at her trailer and then he goes home and then she talks to the kids that are there before she then leaves again. So why the trip to the hospital at all? Because there's really no time if you're trying to get back by 7 and you're only getting you're not getting there till 6 and it's a half-hour drive. Or is it because I said to Stephen, I know there were times like with Prison Break, they would play last week's episode would be like 7 to 8. And then a current episode would be 8 to 9. So maybe they're trying to get back by 8 for Prison Break from 8 to 9. But even so, it's just going, so you're still getting, you're going to get to the hospital 6-ish. So did you just spent an hour and then drove back? I don't know. That timeline is very, very weird to me. Tara says, I think Brendan was told to implicate Stephen from his mother and Scott, thinking he would get a lesser sentence, and the police goaded Brendan into saying more. The fight that Barb and Stephen had days before has a lot to do with it, because he told Barb she was a horrible mother and her kids will amount to nothing. Bobby was pissed about the red van being sold. My opinion in Brendan is that Brendan is Stephen's alibi, because Brendan and Stephen were together that night. So I believe the police were trying to lead Brendan to implicate Stephen. Brendan's not understanding what they're leading him to. So that's how it now becomes that Brendan was a part of it. I don't think that Brendan would implicate himself even on his mother's orders for that, to try and protect Scott and Bobby, because I don't think Brendan is able to do that. Brendan would just screw up, and he would be all upset, and he would say, why this isn't fair. He would be upset. So I do not think that he's intentionally doing anything, and that is him trying to protect anyone. I think Brendan is complete and innocent, as we just discussed the other day. Completely innocent on all of this. This poor kid with this low mental capacity has just been dragged through the mud by law enforcement and his family. I think it's really sad. And yeah, Bobby didn't want the van sold. He wanted it to be another vehicle for them to do whatever in. That's something that I learned. Why didn't I remember this from the get-go? Because to me, this is major. You ready? You guys sitting down? So I asked Stephen about the towel incident, about Teresa saying, or was it even Teresa said it? I can't even remember now if it's Teresa saying it happened, or this is just somebody reporting hearsay that Teresa said this, right? That Stephen had answered in a towel. And I said to Stephen, I said, wasn't that, because you've got a pool? I'm like, that's what I recall hearing. You were out by a pool. And he said, no, he's never answered the door in a towel for Teresa, ever. He said that he wasn't the one that always dealt with Teresa when she came there. Bobby was. So that got me with, if there is a towel story, was it Bobby that was once in a towel when she came for a visit? When he's this sick, depraved lunatic with these stuff on his computer and has some obsession with Teresa, because Stephen said he would always make comments about Teresa is coming and knowing when Teresa's going to be there. And this is the first I have ever heard that Bobby dealt with Teresa when she's been there to take a picture of a car before. Interesting, huh? I thought that was a pretty big thing right there. Let me scroll. Hi, Sharon. I'm doing well. Andrea says, I wonder if Sweaty Sweat Pig is sitting next to Carla watching this. Julie says, is Steven still getting money raised from the Mamathon? I didn't talk to him about that at all. He knows how I feel on that whole thing, and that no matter what money came in, Steven's not getting all of that. And also they're making money off of the ads. So that's stuff that he would never even know what came in. But Steven says once he's out, he's going to be looking into everything. So right now they can get away with whatever they're doing, but he's going to look at everything. So Jennifer says, I was going to go to the rally, but didn't because it would have been awkward. I don't deter anybody from going. I think it's stupid and that they look like a joke, but I understand that there's some people that think they're going for a good thing. And I've told you, Steven approves of the rally. So, free will, but I think there's better things that could be organized that would actually help the case. Maybe I should do that. Miley says, I look very tan. Carol Ann says, it's fair enough. Social media has far more reach than a rally. Well, making a murderer, so Netflix is what really did this phenomenal thing for Steven. So like Carol Ann, for example, I told Steven how Carol Ann is the one that turned over the pointed Kathleen in the direction of those gravel pit bones. And I said, and now Carol Ann is also all over these phone calls, because Steven somebody had told him that these phone calls were released, but nobody told him what was in the calls or any of that, so I went over all that stuff with him in the calls. And I said, so Carol Ann is going over all these calls. And I said, so this is somebody who is from Australia, retired law enforcement, who never would have known Steven's case if not for making a murderer. And that's what got her looking into these things. And fresh eyes are good. It doesn't matter if you have Kathleen Zellner, who is, the best person, the best lawyer to get when you're wrongfully convicted. You can't see everything. And some things could be literally right in front of your face, but there's so much to wade through that you miss it. And so Carol Ann is the one that sent that on. And look what it's done. It can be what frees Steven. So, and he does say, thank you, Carol Ann, so that stuff is, quite amazing. So that's the good things that come out of it. Not people that just want to hold up a sign. And, I saw some of the signs they're holding up of, talking about the truth or whatever. And it's like, and you're here with Barb. So who are you telling to tell the truth? Barb's right there, lying her freaking head off. Oh, direct that at Barb. Are you trying to tell Manitowoc to tell the truth? Tell Barb to tell the truth. This is her son and her brother that's in prison. She owes more to Steven and Brendan than Manitowoc does when it comes to telling the truth. Carol Ann says, where is this video of Dolores? Whose channel? do I even want, see, I don't, I never even want to give those people a click, a viewing, but it's Tracy Strunzi, who still tries to do I don't make any money off of these videos. Oh, well, then why is there a commercial in it? Julia, hey Jax, can we talk about the paperwork with the evidence? There are some things that don't add up. So I just wanted to get some kind of professional standpoint of who would not notice there were things about the evidence didn't add up. Well, I'm not an professional, but whatever you want to bring up, these things are always open for whatever anybody wants to talk about. We'll talk about. Well, not everything. Some things I won't. Sharon asks, who does Stephen think murdered Teresa? Bobby. Cecilia. Well, and let me point out that he says that's what the evidence points to, is Bobby. Bobby and Scott. So he gets really pissed off that the other groups don't allow people to talk about that Bobby and Scott are the real killers. Because all the evidence shows that it's them. Cecilia, I wonder how many of Stephen's family really believes Bobby and Scott did it, but afraid to speak up. Yeah. See, and I go into these videos not wanting to get into a big bitch fest because I know I just look nasty. But most in Stephen's family, just other than his parents, they don't really care. They care whatever's going to bring them attention or money. That's why, like, they didn't ever go visit Stephen until Making a Murderer came out. Left him there to rot. But then this big popular show comes out, and now they all want to be on that list. So, Carol Ann says, why 2 trips to the hospital in one day? Right. Yeah. That makes no sense at all. If he knew he was going there with Barb that night, why would he go during the day? Especially if, he wants to hunt. Wouldn't you spend the more time hunting? And him and his mom don't get along. He has assaulted his mother. And that's what I said to Stephen, because I'm like, why hasn't anybody talked to Scott's mother? Because Scott's brother Sean had been all over the internet early on talking about how Scott did not visit their mom that day. So why hasn't Scott's mother back then asked, was Scott here? Because I'm sure she would have said the truth, whichever way it was, if Scott was there or not. Because this is the son who shoves her around. So, and why would Scott go to the hospital? Then he goes home to hunt, then picks Barb up and goes back to the hospital. But now remember, Stephen says he saw Scott's truck parked at Bobby's that day. That his truck was parked behind Bobby's. So he said if Bobby had wanted to leave, he wouldn't be able to leave because Scott was parked directly behind Bobby's truck. So where's that in the timeline? How come Scott and Bobby don't talk about Scott was over at his trailer? Kimberly says, is there hospital footage of them driving or leaving the hospital? Are there witnesses in nursing who has said, yeah, they were indeed here? I don't think any hospital footage was ever found. And I don't recall anybody at the hospital ever being questioned. But see, again, that's because law enforcement just wanted to now frame Stephen for this. So they weren't truly looking where they should have been looking. But why didn't Strang and Buting do it? Stephen is not happy with Strang and Buting at all. He says there's so many things he told them to do and they didn't do it. And that their excuse would be, well, the state already looked into that. And I'm just kind of aghast at that. Because why would you just believe what Sweaty Sweat says? Why wouldn't you be doing your own investigation into that stuff? And so I'm actually going to an event on Friday that Strang and Buting and Drizzen and Nyrider are all going to be at. And Buting messaged me this week, the other day, and said, that he and I could get together and talk a little that day. So it's like, the last time, was it the last time I talked to Buting? Because I'm trying to remember, because I've seen Buting at his book things, and then I've seen him at Brendan's hearings. So I can't remember if it was the last time. But I have told him previously about how Stephen says there's a lot of sketchy things around Buting on this case. So we'll see what happens on Friday. Carol Ann says, I think in reality, she didn't want to leave home till Brendan came home after helping Steve, then went to Scott's. The lie is either to give Scott an alibi or she colluded with law enforcement to be away while the burning was happening, or both. Yeah, and that's something Stephen had said, when I was talking about Bear and how did Bear react to people and such. And Stephen was home that day. So he's like, he would have thought he would have heard Bear if somebody came and did something at the burn pit. So obviously, whoever did what to the burn pit is when Stephen wasn't around, because he would have heard Bear. So, the stuff planted there doesn't mean it had to have been planted in his burn pit on Halloween. So it could have been, when he was in Crivets, when he wasn't home. Heather says, any new news on Bobby? Any evidence? Nothing new right now. We're still just, we're waiting on these gravel pit bones for Judge Flowers to rule on that. Kimberly says, I work in a hospital and I think there would be video of them being there, arriving there, or leaving. Right, back then, but that wouldn't be available now, and nobody did anything with it back at that time. Stephen kept saying he wanted it, but I don't think that was ever followed up on either by the state or by his defense attorneys. Carol Ann says, Barb was Brendan's alibi. She saw him come home with Steve after the dishes were done, and then she left a little while after. She could have alibied him. Excellent point, Carol Ann. But now she's lying. Why? Paula says, hearsay by her coworker, I think. That'll be in reference to the towel thing. Carol Ann says, Bobby had contact with Teresa. Okay, so it's getting back to what I had said before. Yeah, that's what Stephen told me yesterday. That Bobby is the one that met with Teresa a couple of times when she came there to take photographs. Which I've never heard before. So, yeah, I think that's pretty major. Kitty says, that's why it's been said that the family teased Bobby all the time about him liking her and Teresa being his girlfriend. Janet says, Bobby is one sick man. Cindy says, then why would Barb go through Stephen instead of Bobby if Bobby dealt with Teresa? Well, I think Stephen is the one that would make the appointment. So that's why it would go through him. And then Bobby didn't want the van sold. So that's why it would go through Stephen this time, because Bobby probably said no, he wasn't going to do it. But now you go with, was this premeditated by Bobby? And that's why, too, it would be, he needed to make sure it was Stephen that dealt with her. Audrey says, but Bobby didn't say he knew her much. Another lie. Talea, is that how I say your name? What's the update from the legal team? No update. We're waiting on the judge's response on the bones that were given to the Halbach family. So we're just waiting on that. No idea how long it's going to take before we get that. Heather says, does Stephen still have good relationships with his family members? His relationship is pretty decent with Chuck and Earl, his brothers, and he adores his parents. So that's what I have to say about that. Jose says, KZ accepted the case after watching Making a Murderer 1. So yes, Netflix was crucial for Stephen. And I discussed that with Stephen yesterday too, on, because Stephen had been trying to get Kathleen prior to Making a Murderer come out, but she was too busy and all, so she didn't take the case. It's only once Making a Murderer came out, and then, you're seeing this stuff that this guy is innocent. And don't let Sandy convince you that she got Kathleen for Stephen, because she didn't. Stephen told her to reach out to Kathleen. So yes, she reached out to Kathleen, but it's on Stephen's instructions. So let's not give her a medal for that. But it was Making a Murderer that did it. San says, are they feeding them better? You mentioned something about his diet before. He was bitching about that yesterday, that again on weekends, they're not giving them, they're supposed to be getting the one hot meal a day. And so it's happening on the weekends that they don't have the staff or whatever, so they just slack off on that and don't give them any a hot meal. So he's gets really pissed off about it. But then he's still on the, so when you're at a visit, there's the wall of vending machines that's got, there's stuff you can microwave, salads, the chips and candy and all this stuff. And Stephen, all he wants is a V8, and he only wants one because, because I visited with him, way longer than you're normally able to visit. So I don't know if it was because it was Father's Day that that I was there longer. So I was there over 4 hours, and he only had the one V8. He had clearly finished it throughout, and I'm like, you want another one? And no, he just wanted, and the same thing happens when I go and visit Marnie or Melissa or Kent. they, they don't want the ton of food that, Marnie, she wants, it's really funny. There's one machine that's ice cream. And so she wanted a Klondike bar. So, cause she just, loves them. And so the one week I got the Klondike bar, or tried to, and inside, so it's the big machine, like you're thinking of like a carnival, the claw game, so it's the big thing, glass, and there's literally a cooler in there, like a cooler you bring to tailgate at a game or whatever. And so then something like suctions the lid of the cooler open, and then a claw thing comes down, and inside the cooler it has those cardboard dividers, those X things all over. So it's got the different ice cream things. And so then it pulls out the thing for the Klondike bar, and it wasn't a Klondike bar. It was some generic, some weird thing that was freezer burned and hard, so the one week there, so even though the picture says Klondike bar, there was no Klondike bar in there. And Marnie didn't want it, and she gave it to one of the officers because she's like, oh yeah, he's one, he'll eat anything. And so he was thrilled to get this ice cream bar. And then the next time I visited her, she's like, rumor is there's real Klondike bars in the machine, because the inmates aren't allowed to go over by the machines. So then I was able to get her Klondike bar. But that's all Marnie ever wants is a Klondike bar. And then she wants, what do you call it? A parfait or whatever. That's the yogurt granola thing. That's it. That's all she wants. Melissa she always wants an apple juice or an orange juice and fruit, but not all the time fruit. And then sometimes she'll get like a burger. But it's not a whole ton of food. They just, they don't really care. But the stuff is really expensive. And they have stuff not marked correctly. And I'm going to have to remember the next time I visit Stephen to just know it offhand. But the machine for his V8 says the V8 is $1.50. And so I put the $1.50 in there, and they're like, nope, $2. So now so it's $2 for that. Bottle of water is $2. When you buy the fruit and stuff for Melissa and Marnie, the parfait or whatever, it's like $6. Craziness. All right. So, sorry. Off in another direction there. Carol Ann says, LOL, not a lawyer. Yeah. Julie said, I had my grandkids this weekend, ages 11 and 13. I explained to them about never talk to the police without an adult. And once you turn 18, the first thing you should say is, I want a lawyer. Of course, told them if they're a witness, that's different. But if you are being accused of something you did not do, follow my suggestions. I hope they understand. Well, Julie, Brendan was just a witness too, and look what happened to him. So, you need a lawyer anytime you're talking to them. Sorry, my dogs are outside and we're barking. Tara says, I think the videos are in the groups. I have never seen them. I wonder if Bobby's wife sleeps with one eye open. Well, and you got to remember too that Bobby's wife was with Bobby during this time, or because they were high school sweethearts. So maybe they were on a break, but that girl was with Bobby back at that time. So, Andrea says, Bobby and Scott, I think Barb knows more than she's leading on. Cassie says, does Stephen's parents think Bobby is guilty? I don't know. I have never met Stephen's father. I've met Dolores only twice, and I don't talk to her. When I went those 2 times, I don't really talk to her about the case. When I visited her in August last year, I started to talk to her because Kathleen had just filed something, but then it was clear she doesn't know what's going on. So it's okay, I'm not going to talk about this stuff because she doesn't know. So, and it's not my job to tell her this stuff, you know. So I don't know who his parents think did it. I just know they want him home. You know, Stephen talks to his mother almost every day, and every time he talks to her, the first thing she says is, "When are you coming home?" So I think that's what the parents focus on, not about who did it. It's just, we want our boy home. Janet says, why did Detective Lank have Scott's trailer towed? And what day was it towed? Yeah, and that's something Stephen and I talked about yesterday too, and I can't remember, but wasn't it Bobby's vehicle was burned? Wasn't that trailer burned? I can't keep up with all these vehicles that were then destroyed and why. Miley says, I can't imagine ever assaulting one of my parents. That is so screwed up. Says a lot about a person. Well, you can look at Scott's record. His mother's not the only female he has assaulted. Natasha says, I'm curious to know why Ryan Hilgas hasn't been further investigated. He's also been very closed off and hasn't spoken to anyone that I'm aware of. Well, it again just goes to the state wanted Stephen guilty. So that's why nobody else was investigated, because it takes it away from Stephen is the one that did it to try and get out of that $36 million lawsuit. So, and I believe Ryan Hilgas helped them plant the RAV4 at the salvage yard. Whether or not he physically drove the vehicle there or he's just giving them the spare key. But you also have her day planner that he had that was with her on that day. So how does Ryan Hilgas have something that was in her vehicle when she's missing? So that's also why he's not investigated, because he's part of the cover-up. Leanne says, were Bobby and Scott late for work that day? Bobby was. Was Scott too? I don't recall. I know Bobby was, because that was in one of Kathleen's filings that, it's never been mentioned that Bobby was actually late to work that day. But now, remember, Scott worked at the aluminum foundry, and that's where you get the Sitkey letter. And, assuming that Sitkey is how somebody illiterate spells out Scott's nickname of Skinny, that something was burned, body burned at, was it 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the smelter. Jeffrey says, it's bonkers. I am very surprised Bobby's wife hasn't left after what was found on the disc. Yeah, and they've got 2 kids. Mickey says, the hospital should have had cameras. That could have easily been proven back then if Scott was or wasn't in the hospital. Right. And Carol Ann says, law enforcement weren't looking to verify that. Yeah. Jeffrey says, Bobby should already be serving time. And, Bobby committing this crime is also because he's sick. So I know this has been something that people have discussed before, but it's, there's a lot of people that don't think that this would have been his only crime. So by leaving this guy out in the free world, how many other people has it hurt? Just like going after Stephen for the Penny Bernstein attempted rape. How many women were raped by the real offender while Stephen was doing time? Okay, and Christy says that Scott was off for mom's surgery, supposedly. So Scott not at work. Aaron says, was any info from the hospital requested? Doubt it. I don't know. I just know you hear Stephen asking about it over and over again. Was he listened to? This is a problem he has with his attorneys, that nobody listened to him. He had so many things, like he said he told them to get Bobby's computer. And then next thing he knows, the state went and got Bobby's computer. So he knows they were listening to his calls with his attorneys, or did his attorney say something to anybody? And then they're like, okay, well, the state looked at it. Instead of doing their own investigating into it, it's just the state did it. There's nothing on it. It's not Bobby's computer. It just, so many dropped balls. Heather says, any info on the ex-boyfriend? Are you talking about Ryan Hilgas? Nothing new on him. I know he changed his name on Facebook. I don't know if that's that he changed his name to it out in life too, but on Facebook he's Ryan Hill, not Ryan Hilgas. Kitty, and he's still a nurse as far as I know. Kitty says, I don't believe that they are the best and did the best they could. Sorry, I think they are like everyone else now in doing what benefits them and adds to their pockets, Buting and String. Well, and I said, I'm like disappointed that Nyrider and Drizzen have joined in on the lawyer tour, because they had seemed for all these years to be above it all and focused on helping Brendan, not getting out in the press and selling books and all that stuff. Even Strang wasn't real, it was Buting who's, been making his living off of Stephen's name for the last several years. But now it's the four of them, which, like I said, I'm going to see them all this Friday. It kind of bums me out. Now, Stephen says in Brendan's lawyer's case that, Stephen says Brendan's case is done. There's nowhere for Brendan's case to go. He says that Brendan's case is waiting on Stephen's case. And he said, but instead of them going out on a tour, why aren't they trying to help other cases? So, Heather says, will you let us know how your conversation goes Friday with Jerry? Oh, absolutely, I will. It's an all-day thing. Some symposium thing. It also has Barry Scheck, who is one of OJ's attorneys, and then he founded the Innocence Project. So it's all these different classes throughout the day. So, and there's going to be a bunch of people I know who are going also. Tammy from WMP Justice Review will be there. Marnie Yang's father will be there. Paul Kaluzinski, Dr. Rudd from Melissa's case. So there's a lot of us going to go check out this event. And so I plan on bringing notebook and taking notes. Maybe I'll video some of it and go live. So we'll see how it goes, but I'll be there. It goes until, let me pull this up. It'll take me a little while to pull that up on my other page here. So bear with me as my slow computer opens this stuff. Where is it? Is it in, can't remember which email I registered for this event at. Probably would go faster just going to Buting's Facebook page and go and trying to find which email I have my tickets to this event in. There it is. Okay, so it is open. Click here to view the agenda. Slow, slow, slow. Because this is a new organization that Strang and Buting started called the Center for Integrity in Forensic Sciences. So this is called the CIFS Academic Symposium. It's hosted in partnership with the Northwestern University that has the Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law, which that is where Drizzen and Nyrider are from, and Pritzker is our new governor in Illinois, who I work tirelessly for. I really, really love J.B. Pritzker, our new governor. So from 9 to 9:15 is welcome by Dean Strang, Jerry Buting, and Keith Finley, co-founders, the Center for Integrity in Forensic Sciences, Stephen Drizzen and Laura Nyrider, the Center on Wrongful Convictions. From 9:15 to 9:45 is A Broken System, How Did We Get Where We Are Today, by Barry Scheck and Peter Newfield, co-founders of the Innocence Project. 9:45 to 10:45 is After the NAS Report, the National Commission on Forensic Science, and PCAST, Where Do We Go From Here, Part 1. And that is done by William Thompson, Professor Emeritus, University of California, Irvine, Jennifer Mnookin, Dean, and David G. Price and Dallas P. Price, Professor of Law, UCLA School of Law, Peter Neufeld, co-founder Innocence Project and former member National Commission of Forensic Science, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, attorneys and co-founders of the Center for Integrity in Forensic Sciences. 10:45 to 11 is a break. 11 to 12, After the NAS Report, the National Commission on Forensic Science, and PCAST, Where Do We Go From Here, Part 2. So that's the same people that was in the Part 1. 12 to 12:15 is The Need for Reform, done by James Falvey, General Counsel and Chief Regulatory Officer at EMX. 12:15 is lunch. It says on your own, so they're not covering our lunch. 1:15 to 2:15 is Problems with Pattern Matching Disciplines, Firearms, and Tool Marks, which is done by Jennifer Friedman, Assistant Special Circumstances Coordinator and Forensic Science Coordinator for the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office, and William Thompson, Professor Emeritus, University of California, Irvine. Sorry, why can't I read today? 2:15 to 3:15 is Problems with Medical Diagnosis of Crime, Shaken Baby Syndrome, Abuse of Head Trauma, and its intersection with confession evidence, which that's Melissa Kaluzinski. And that is Catherine Judson, Executive Director of the Center for Integrity and Forensic Sciences and National SBS AHT Litigation Coordinator, Keith Finley, who we already read, or no, we didn't, Associate Professor of Law, University of Wisconsin Law School, and co-founder of the Center for Integrity of Forensic Sciences, and David Thompson, CFI, Vice President of Operations and Director of Research and Innovation, Wicklander Zalowski and Associates. 3:15 to 3:30 is another break. 3:30 to 4:30 is Reimagining the Crime Laboratory, the Houston Example, which is taught by Amy Castillo and Akila Mance, the Houston Forensic Science Center, and Sandra Guerra Thompson, Professor of Law, Houston Law Center and board member, HFSC. And then from 4:30 to 5 is closing remarks by Barry Scheck. So that's the whole day. So like going to school, which I'm not good at school. I'm not very smart. But I'll be there and take notes, and we'll let you know how that goes. And then also if I do have a private conversation with Jerry. Heather says, is that why she married Scott? So it came to a point she couldn't testify against him. Any thoughts? Well, when you listen to those phone calls with Jody, you hear Stephen talking about Barb is always Scotty, Scotty, Scotty. That was said, and that she was always with him. So, you know, she liked the dude. But now whether or not the marriage came about, that she married him, not long after her divorce was final, because, she was dating Scott during her marriage. So, yeah, I don't know if the marriage came about so she wouldn't have to testify. But they weren't going that direction. There was no real threat. Nothing, nobody was going after Scott. Julie says, regarding Bobby knowing Teresa, in 2005, AOL was huge and had so many chat rooms. I'm going to get that Teresa and Bobby had conversations in a chat room. No way to check now, but it's very possible. Yeah, and I've heard somebody else mention that before, too, that they wondered if Bobby had any kind of going back and forth with Teresa, because then you also had Teresa was taking those boudoir photos, and that she was having threesomes with married couples. So, yeah, I'm not going to dig my hole any deeper on that one. Carol Ann says, that's why he was looking out the dining room window to see the interaction. There you go. Eunice says, hello, everybody from Paris. Hello, Paris. Francisco says, are we still waiting on response from court? July 10th is still deadline for court. Yeah, we're still waiting on the judge. I don't know what the deadline is. I'm the worst person to ask on when deadlines are, because I have a number thing, first of all, and I get so confused on how long anybody ever has. And I've got all these different cases that I advocate for, and I never know, because like we just had Kent's oral arguments 2 weeks ago or whatever. So I'm like, I don't know when the ruling, is it the 30 days? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? Do they have, whenever they feel like it? I don't know. And I know somebody had made a deadline was supposed to be that just recently passed, but I don't know where people are getting the deadline thing. I don't ever see anything in, there's never anything in a transcript saying, and the judges have this amount of time to get, so I don't know. Stephen is hopeful we'll hear something in the next month. Carol Ann says, Ryan Hilgas won't cooperate with KZ. Yep. And Miley says that Ryan is shady. Heather says, Mike Halbach seems off to me too. Yeah, he does. Christy says Scott was off. Oh, he was at the hospital. Carol Ann says, also those calls to Ryan from an unidentified number on November 4th. Yeah. And it's something I said to Stephen yesterday too, was, why are Ryan Hilgas, Scott Blodorn, and Michael Halbach visiting the salvage yard? Why are they on the log sheets? Sometimes signing in and not seeing them sign out, or vice versa. Why are they there? They've got no right to be there. Why are they there? You'll see when Avery family members sign in and out, because that also makes no sense on why they weren't allowed to be in their homes. Why couldn't Dolores be at her home? Because if you're saying Stephen did it and it happened at Stephen's, that's a quarter mile away down that road. That has nothing to do with where Dolores lived or Chuck lived at the one on the other side of the office, you know, so on the other road going towards the one that leads into the salvage yard. So why did they all have to leave their property? When crimes are committed in a neighborhood, they don't make everybody in the surrounding homes leave their houses for the investigation. So why did all these people have to leave? Why were they not allowed there? But then you allowed Ryan Hilgast, Scott Blodorn, and Michael Halbach walking through the salvage yard. Doesn't make any sense. And yeah, Ryan got some weird phone calls. Yeah. Ryan Hilgast is a nurse. Oh, and there's people answering that. Julie says, if I remember correctly, Scott didn't go to work at all that night. I could be wrong. Kelly says, oh, you're talking to Julie. Kristen says, the producers who made When They See Us should make a movie about Stephen Avery. How upsetting is that? You know, and Stephen was talking about there needs to be accountability for law enforcement when they break the law. And so I told him about When They See Us and what was done there. And then there's a documentary on Showtime that just premiered this weekend called 16 Shots. And that's local here in Chicago. That's when this 17-year-old black boy, Laquan McDonald, was murdered by Jason Van Dyke, a white Chicago cop. And what a huge deal that was, how long it took. But for the first time, a cop was charged for murdering someone, and he was found guilty. You know, and that needs to happen. So they stop just doing whatever they want. You know, that when you get caught, you're going to go to prison. And in Jason Van Dyke's case, is he first went to Kent Pellegrini's prison, which is a prison that you have to behave there or you're removed. So there isn't those fights or anything going on there because it's a good place to be and people don't want to leave there. And it was getting inmates all stirred up and agitated because he was there. And so then they shipped him out and he went to Connecticut. And as soon as he got to Connecticut, somebody beat the shit out of him. And good. That guy's got it coming. And so now you have in When They See Us, the prosecutor and the law enforcement are now feeling repercussions for something that happened in the 80s, you know, but they should be in prison for that. Oh my God. Yeah. So if you haven't watched When They See Us, watch it. It's only 4 episodes, right? And then 16 Shots just came out on Showtime this past weekend. That's just a documentary, like an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. Watch those. Ugh. Christy said, Bobby worked nights and was 2 hours late. Carol Ann says, how did Stephen know suspect stuff was on the computer? I don't know. I didn't ask him. I sometimes I want to ask so much stuff, but then I don't ask because I don't want to get Stephen in a situation that he, especially when we're on the phone. So I didn't ask. I just know he said he told them to get the computer. And they didn't do it. Next thing he knows, the state has it. Tara says, has Penny Bernstein come out in Stephen's defense? Nope. She jumped on board that he was guilty, just like the Wisconsin Innocence Project did. And the Avery Task Force was renamed. Or was it the Avery Task Force? Is that what it was called? I don't remember. Everybody turned on him. And I haven't heard anybody publicly coming back and saying, oh, our bad, we shouldn't have turned on him. But I find that to be extremely shitty. And I know the Innocence Project does a lot of good. And the Innocence Project is who got Stephen freed the first time. But with how quickly everybody would just believe that he was guilty, that really upsets me. Carrie and Jack said, one interview, Scott said he was at work that day. Other interview, he said he took off to go see his mom. Yeah. Stories change, just like, you know, the fire was this high, the fire was this high, the fire was this high. Christy says, the only thing that was verified from what I can remember was that Scott's mom did have surgery. Then Christy says, they have a completely different number sequence than a phone number. For example, my DC number was blah, blah, blah. Heather says, Jerry told me through a message that he thinks the vial of blood is still the source. Yeah, and I know Kathleen has said that she thinks, was it the blood from his bathroom? Either the blood from his bathroom or the blood that was in the Grand Am. And I know she also talks about thinking it was Bobby that planted the blood. I still think it was law enforcement, not Bobby. Cecilia says, I've seen on posts before something about pictures of Teresa on Bobby's computer and something about pictures of her and Stephen. Can you explain that? Because I've always been confused as to what the pictures were or if there really was any at all. And there's Carol Ann already replying to that. Yeah, so there were pictures of women that looked similar to Teresa that were being murdered and raped, and then there was also children being raped, and there was a file that said Teresa Hallback, and there was a file that said DNA, and was there a file that said RAV4? But just the pictures of the rape and torture and killing of women is enough to go, you know, WTF. Cindy says, I still think that Ryan Hilgas has something to do with Teresa. Miley says, that's right. He had no business being there. San says, because they needed to be alone so they could plant stuff. Duh. Caroline said 22 calls. Holy cow. Leanne says, who was the woman who law enforcement was working under, the one who couldn't stand Stephen? Wendy Baldwin. Didn't one of Stephen's lawyers used to work with her before Stephen's case? Think it was Buting? These people are so intertwined. I don't recall now who worked with who and who knew who and all that. Wendy Baldwin is the evil cow who is on the video. You hear her talking about when they're walking into Stephen's trailer and she's like, get his shoes in case there's other unsolved crimes. And when there's the letter for the Innocence Project luncheon or whatever, dinner or whatever, and she's like, guess he won't be making that one. Ugh. Eunice says, sorry for my English. Oh, don't worry. But if we tell Bobby is guilty, what is the process with police, RAV, coroner, can't come? Why? everything was done the way it was to preserve that their narrative that Stephen was the guilty party. So they're going to hide everything that could possibly show that he is innocent. And they would keep the coroner away because in a prior case, they wanted her to lie and she wouldn't, that she follows the evidence. So that's why they would keep the coroner out of there. So they were never going to do anything that would see if that Bobby could have done it, because they need Stephen gone. Miley says, I cried through more than 50% of When They See Us. So sad. Yeah, the one boy who at all his parole hearings, he would not say he was guilty. And so while all the other boys, did a couple years, that kid was in there so long, and the beatings he took. And so I had the same feelings that I got for Brendan, for that boy. Carol says, ask Jerry if he still thinks the blood was from the vial. I'll try and remember. Somebody can message me on Friday and nag me about it, because my mind, I'm old. I forget. Janet says, I think the whole family knew Bobby watched all that stuff on his computer. Well, and I love the constant protection of him, where they'll lie and say it wasn't Bobby's computer. And you see law enforcement's video of when they walked into Barb's trailer, you see the computer in Bobby's bedroom. Yes, sure. At one point it was out in the living room. And yeah, sure. Other people could go in Bobby's room and use the computer. And Brendan would use it for video games. And Brendan used it to chat with people. But there's the dates and times that these things were put on the computer, and everybody else is at work or school, and Bobby's the only one home during the day. So, and it infuriates me when someone likes to try and say that it could have been Stephen that went into Barb's and put that stuff on Bobby's computer. You're a family member. And pointing the finger again at Stephen, where you claim you want to do hashtag supporter, hashtag not fans, yet you're trying to lead people to think that it was Stephen who could have put the stuff on the computer, or Tom Yonda, who didn't even live there at that time. Because you're so desperate to protect Bobby. For what? Why do you want to protect Bobby? Protecting Bobby hurts Brendan and Stephen. So, Bobby put that stuff on the computer. Why hide for him? Why cover for him? Kitty says, I saw something being talked about via Twitter, Reddit, that they think the blood came from Stephen's personal car when the RAV was towed during the night and took way too long to get to the WSCL. Right, because there's stuff in Stephen's Grand Am from his cut finger. So you had that cut finger in the Grand Am and on the bathroom sink. Julie says, could it be AG Call's mother? She didn't see anything wrong in any wrongdoing in Stephen's 1985 case. Yeah, that's that Peg Logenslager, however you say her name. I don't. And I did ask Buting on that once, because people had said that she was like Buting's mentor or whatever, and he claimed to me that he didn't know her, knew of her but didn't know her. And that I know I asked him about outside of Brendan's hearing. I remember that So he told me he didn't have any kind of relationship, whether it was just a personal legal community or a work relationship with Peg Lagerlocker. Carol Ann says, I just can't think of her name right now. Middle-aged woman, short, wavy hair. Cindy says, maybe Teresa was partying with Carmen and they OD'd and law enforcement used this death to frame Stephen. Has anybody ever looked at if Carmen and Teresa knew each other? And Carol says, the Carmen theory has been debunked. Yeah, if it's, it's one thing to find out if those two girls knew each other, but yeah, it has been debunked that the bones are not Carmen Bootwell. But her death is still suspect of what actually went on there. You're welcome, Eunice. And hi, Zoe. Shelly saying Peg. Carmen saying, watching from San Diego, California, you're doing a great job. I believe that Bobby and Stephen killed Teresa. Barb knows a lot more than what she is leading on. Carol Ann says, yes, he bled in his Grand Am, but that blood came back with 2 male profiles. Really? Carol Ann said, it would be like asking me if I know the police commissioner when I was a sergeant. Okay, that makes sense. Zoe says, the harder the name is to speak out, the greater asshole the person is. Kitty says, yeah, okay, he didn't know her, but worked by her office and was appointed by Peg Lagerlocker to a special seat on her committee. Okay, because, yeah, I know there's some kind of connection, but, yeah. Julie says, I still have hope that Strang working with the governor in criminal justice reform can make a difference. I do too. All right, so now I'm down at the bottom. I got through all your comments. Let me try and go back to the original thing for this was my meeting visit with Stephen yesterday. He wants people to know that he's not, he's not depressed. He knows that letter that Kathleen posted made people, because I told him to, I said it made people think you were giving up. And so it was just a rallying cry, keep the, Stephen's never giving up. What else? I'm trying to think. I can't bring anything with me, so I can't take notes. Tara, the whole country needs reform. Knock on wood, hopefully comes around. What else? Well, like I said, the biggest thing I came away with is he's saying that Bobby had contact with Teresa Halbach prior. And that he thinks it could have been Bobby that was in a towel because he says it was not him. I said, well, you have a pool, I don't remember where it came from, but I recall defending it to people when they would bring it up saying he has a pool, he was in the pool. But he says no. He was never because he'd be working. Teresa's always coming on a weekday and he works, so he's not in the pool. Stephen is very work driven, and he doesn't want to just sit around and, wants to work. So there's no being in a pool on a weekday when he's going to be working. So I found that very interesting. Okay, Carol Ann says it came from Kratz and a couple of people at Auto Trader. All right, so at the end of this, that I've been on an hour and 44 minutes. This week, I'm going on Wednesday. I'll be visiting with Marnie Yang and Melissa Kaluzinski. I actually just got today my copy of My Mom Marnie. So this is not out yet. This is a book written by Marnie Yang's 3 kids. These two, wrong way, these two are twins. They were 16 at the time, and he was 12. And it's 11 years later, I think, 10 years later. So this book is going to be released right now, saying July 1st. And so this is through Words Matter Publishing. And Words Matter Publishing is all about criminal injustice and wrongful convictions. And so there's also WMP Justice Review. And that's where Tammy, who's is the driving force behind all of this, has put together this team of experts that has been investigating Marnie's case for the last several years. And I sat in on a couple months ago on a roundtable that took 2 days, where all the different experts went over their area on how they can prove that Marnie is innocent. And I know I've told you guys before that right now, anything, if you Google Marnie Yang, everything you find out there on her is she's guilty. But I'm sure that's what happened once upon a time with Steven Avery too. So I ask that you all reserve judgment until you get everything. Let me just tell you, from me sitting in on that, the girl is innocent. But there's going to be a filing for her, and it's like the first one that is truly coming from her side, from her defense. So I can't say anything on it right now until after the filing. So once that filing comes out, can go into more. And once this book comes out, we can discuss. So, and I haven't read this yet. It came today where I was like, I'm having a political event at my house on Thursday, and I'm going to be at the prison all day Wednesday. And then I have a political event to go to Thursday during the day. And so I'm like, today and tomorrow are the only days I have to clean my house to get ready for, political people to be here. And I'm like, but this book came and I want to read this book. And I'm like, nope, but I got to clean my house. And guess what happened? I fell asleep. I'm gonna guess it's from, driving to the prison yesterday and all tired. So I've cleaned my house. And now I'm yawning because I started sleeping. So anyway, this week. So Wednesday, I'm going to be visiting with Melissa and Marnie. I visit them one at a time. It's not we all talk together. So I visit with one, and then I have to sign out and sign back in and then visit with the other. So I'll visit with them on Wednesday. And then Friday, I'll be going to the symposium. So I'll do a live at some point and we can go over all that stuff. But I don't know at this point for sure when it is, because I don't know all that's on my schedule. And to sound like a douchebag again, I just totally forget, where I thought I had an event I had to go to tonight. And so I had messaged somebody on it and they're like, that's next Monday. I was like, oh. And then somebody wanted to go out to lunch with me. And I said, the only days I would be free is tomorrow and Friday. And they're like, okay, let's go Friday. And then I'm like, wait, no, I can't go Friday. I'm going to this thing in Chicago. So I'm like really scatterbrained right now. So I don't know when I'll be live. I don't know if I'll go live in Gossip or on Steven Avery Project. The difference between the two is when I'm just going to talk strictly case stuff and stuff that's out for public consumption, then I'll do it on Stephen Avery Project. So everybody that follows Stephen Case can get it. When I'm going to veer off into some of the stupid bullshit, I put it in here because, there's a lot of people who don't care about. That's why there's this gossip group. Gossip is for putting all this stupid shit. Let me read through your stuff that's come in before I go there. Carol says, I have their names, but they're on the iPad. Lily says, there was never a name given as to who the towel guy was. Kitty says, thank you, Jackson. Enjoy the rest of your day. Back at ya. Tara says, Sweaty Sweat made up a whole fantasy theory based on Brendan's false confession and dug himself so deep in his lies he doesn't know the truth. Yeah. Elizabeth says, thank you, Jax, for keeping us updated and all you do to help and support Stephen and others. Thank you. Sansa's got to go. Thank you, Jackson, everyone. See you later, San. Zoe says, with all the cameras, they must have thought they're in a movie and they just played their scripts or had a groupie and all had the same dream. Carol says, thanks, Jax, for the feedback from Stephen. And yeah, Carol, you can always message me if there's stuff that you want me to ask, but I do not talk to Stephen all the time. So like him calling me on Saturday was the first time I've heard from him from the last time I visited him, which was like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I don't even remember. Sorry. So, because I'm not one of the ones that you have to call me every day or call me, every week on this day or whatever. Stephen knows he can call me when he wants. So I'm not the best one, but you can send it to me and I can try and ask. But also if it's a phone call, there's only so much I'm going to put on a phone call knowing it's recorded. And, if it's something that you don't want the other side to get a heads up on. Kitty says, start setting reminders on your phone. I know. I used to have it. So like, most of the events I do are all, some kind of Facebook event. And for some reason, it's not going on my phone. And I had that once before, and then I was able to fix it. And now again, my Facebook events aren't on my phone. And I'm not good with techie stuff of any kind. Julie says, take that nap. I took the nap. I really need to clean. I need to dust because I was gone for like over a month, and I was only really home on weekends. And so I haven't dusted in forever. So it's pretty nasty. Christine says, thank you, Jax, for all you do. The boys need to come home now. Terrific says, Carol Ann says, okay, terrific. Zoe, night guys, night Jax. Carol Ann, yep, I'm hesitant to really ask much. Yeah, see, you know better than I do on that stuff. That, yeah, and Carol Ann says, I'd hate to undo something KZ is working on. Kathleen is always my go-to. I've said this in the past too. Stephen's asked me to do something and then I'll put it through Kathleen first and Kathleen says no. So I don't do it. And I know that's made Stephen angry before, but I believe Kathleen knows best. So Rhonda says, speaking of Sweaty Sweat and his child bride, seem pretty quiet lately. Are they hiding? Yeah, I'm not on Twitter, but nobody sent me anything. So who knows? And Laura is the same on technology. Good, Carol. Yeah, send the stuff to Kathleen. And, never, and I'm not saying this to Carol Ann because she already knows the drill with Kathleen, but never assume that she's got everything because we know now she hasn't been given everything from the state. So you could uncover something that she doesn't have. So send it her way. So, all right, I'm out. Remember, Wednesday going to visit Melissa and Marnie. And then Friday is the symposium with Strang and Buting and Drizzen and Night Rider. Tom, could your boyfriend not help with your phone? Oh, don't even get started on that. I will leave you with, I am Apple. He is Android. So let's not start that fight. All right. See y'all. Have a good evening.